Let's talk MTX, DLC, expansion packs, mods, UGC, all at once in one big omnibus of a video. To start with, let's put down some terminology. This isn't perfectly consistent across all of gaming, but this is the terminology I will be using. MTX means microtransaction. So we will just use it in that way. Any very small purchase, we'll say $2 or less. This might include things like one-off cosmetics, but in most games these days, it's some form of repeatable purchase where you're able to spend money over and over again. DLC is something bigger than that. When you're getting into the $5 to $10 to $15 range. You could have DLC that is gameplay focused, where you are buying a new class, or you could have story DLC where it is something that extends the story in some way. In the case of Witcher 3, they actually called this stuff story DLC expansion packs. And they called that very small stuff DLC, and they gave it all away for free. But we're going to use the more broadly accepted terminology. And so I will go up to above DLC is expansion packs. Expansion packs bigger than DLC, getting into the price range of $25 to $45. Introduce a bit of everything in most cases. New gameplay, new story. Sometimes they have a retail presence. They probably have a marketing budget behind them. Often the DLCs did not. Mods are something that is either DLC or in some cases that MTX level content, but generated by your community. UGC just means user-generated content. In most cases, when developers and publishers are using it, they're really referring to the kind of MTX level content. So hats and small things that are generated by the community. For some of the publishers, UGC includes anything that is created by users. That includes things that are outside the game, like fan art or TikToks or Twitch streams. And there's a growing movement within a lot of publishers for a lot of games to really try to double down on that UGC that exists outside of the game ecosystem. And in a lot of ways, actually, that kind of makes a lot of sense because some of these forms of UGC are actually way more viral than the things that exist within the game ecosystem. If I make a really cool TikTok about your soccer game, that might be seen by millions of people. If I make a new hat for your soccer game, that's going to be seen by thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So you can see why maybe there's a bit of a push towards these kinds of UGC. I do think it complicates the conversation a lot because these are very different things. Making a game that is supportive of meme creation and video sharing and that sort of thing is a very different thing than making a game that is supportive of making content that exists inside the game itself. In some cases, there may be an attempt by the game developers to allow people to monetize that so they can scrape a little money off the top. Certainly Bethesda got into some trouble when they tried to monetize mod creation in the case of Fallout. I think this will be an ongoing thing where there is research happening. So there's a fundamental problem with DLC and expansion packs. And that's the attach rate trap. For most story-based DLCs, in my experience at BioWare, your attach rate is going to be somewhere between about 8% and about 15%. You might be able to do a little bit better than 15 for truly impactful things like the Citadel or Trespasser. But in most cases, you're sort of in that 8 to 15% range. If you are building story, you are spending a bit of money on it. So what often happens is that these pieces of DLC, if they're done well, can end up costing enough that they're actually dilutive to the profit margin of the overall title. That's not to say they're not profitable. They're usually profitable, but they can often end up being expensive enough that they're not significantly increasing the profitability of the game, or in some cases even decreasing it. And the reality is that the magnitude of the money that they're making is pretty small. Let me just do some real napkin math right here. If you have a game that sells 10 million copies and you do a $10 piece of DLC that attaches at 10%, that 10 million unit game probably has an average sales price of around $35. That's $350 million for the base game right there. If your DLC is attaching at 10%, you're selling a million of them. And you're only selling it for $10, of which you only keep 7, but let's ignore that for a second. So you're gonna do $10 million on that DLC. So it's only about 3% of your total revenue from that piece of DLC. So it's seen often within publishers as an opportunity cost because it requires attention from often some fairly senior people and therefore can be seen as a bit of a distraction. Additionally, any project of any size existing in an organization, especially a larger organization, has costs associated with it that aren't always fully captured in the process. If you have a project, it needs to exist within the finance system, which means that somewhere along the way, one of the accountants had to write something down and attribute costs to it. It needs to have a code name that exists within the systems that keep track of resources. It needs to get a place to exist within compatibility testing. Any project of any size often gets attributed a fixed cost just to exist. That's not always purely accurate, but there is some truth to that, which means that very, very, very small things can end up pricing themselves out of existence simply because the cost of existing at all isn't zero. Now, there are lots of ways around that. You can bundle a bunch of things together and then have them exist as a single unit within the organization, which allows you to spread that cost across a whole bunch of things. Sometimes those costs aren't truly fixed. Sometimes they are just treated that way for ease of accounting. Within a larger organization, is something to keep in mind is for anything to exist at any size, there is cost and attention and a drag associated with it. And as a result, large organizations often are somewhat unsupportive of very, very small things. Now, I think that's actually a mistake. I think DLC is a great opportunity for you to not have your most senior people marshaling it and paying attention. It's an opportunity to take your next level and your potential new leads and leaders and give them an opportunity to own something and bring something from start to finish, especially for the lower risk DLC. So think of Jaws of Hakon instead of Trespasser. You have the ability to let people stretch a lot more. Because the magnitude of the money is relatively small, that actually gives you the advantage that the downside of a complete catastrophic failure is also pretty small. And if it's something that isn't really pushing your lore forward, then the consequence of failure can be contained. And really, one of the best ways to let people grow and stretch is to give them enough room to fail. And a piece of DLC is often the perfect way to do that because it's small enough and contained enough that you can give them a lot of room to explore the space and enough room to potentially fail. The MTX level stuff that isn't repeatable is usually attaching at a very low percentage. 3%, something like that. But it's incredibly cheap to make. So its margins are usually amazing, but the magnitude is tiny. You're making a package of mage hats for Dragon Age Origins, and you're selling them for $1. And you sell 200,000 of them, so it makes $200,000. But it only cost $20,000 to make. So that's pretty amazing from a profitability perspective. And that's the thing that makes publishers love that repeatable MTX, because for a very small injection of money, they have the potential to generate huge amounts of return. Some games like FIFA generate more than half their money from their repeatable MTX system. So you can see why the attraction is there to have those kinds of systems. The non-repeatable MTX, very small bucket, but again, great opportunity to give some of your junior people an opportunity to own something that has pretty strong, firm guardrails to keep them from getting themselves into trouble. Expansion packs actually solve the attach rate trap to some degree because usually they are big enough and important enough that that attach rate can climb from 10% up to 30%. And that can fix a lot of sins. The expectations on expansion packs are obviously also a lot higher. There's expectations of new gameplay and more impactful story content. So while you might be able to do a significant piece of story DLC with some of your disciplines completely missing, with an expansion pack, that's not going to be possible. You're going to need to build new levels. You're going to need to have new gameplay. You're going to need to have new story. So it becomes an entire project. There's just no way around it. And then, as a result, the seniority of the leadership required goes up as well. I still think it's possible to use your up-and-comers, but the consequence of failure also goes up, so you are going to have to be a bit more careful there. So how do mods and UGC fit into all of this? One thing to know is that right now, publishers really like the idea of user-generated content as a concept, because what user-generated content provides and represents is very high player engagement. You're not building mods and UGC for something you don't care about. Providing a platform for people to generate their own content and share it around is also providing a marketing platform for the game. But the problem is that depending on what kind of mods and UGC you are supporting, you run the risk of undermining some of these other kinds of content that you are going to charge for. I don't think you're really at very high risk of undermining your expansion packs. People will make really impressive, really involved expansion pack level content if given the right tools to generate a mod. But the reality is, at that price point, people are going to pretty much follow your official, canonical, dev-driven stuff. The place where UGC can potentially undermine your post-release economy is at the bottom end. People aren't going to really give you $1 for new mage hats if someone else just made 46,000 new mage hats with better hair and also cool sunglasses that they're giving away for free. So that bottom tier can be completely undermined, potentially, from user-generated content. Sometimes when publishers talk about UGC, they mean even including stuff like posting things on Twitch and making GIFs so that they can generate their own memes. I guess that fairly does fit inside of this ecosystem, and from the publisher's point of view, it does still represent that higher level of engagement. Of course, an instinct can be to try to monetize your UGC. Since it's cutting off the bottom of the dev-created content, maybe there's a way that you can let the people generating your hat packs and hair packs for you make a little bit of money, which is what Team Fortress did to great success. The risk here is that you potentially open yourself up to legal issues, because now you are in a situation where people are monetizing your platform, generating their own content, which might violate copyright or might involve something else that is illegal in certain jurisdictions where it's for sale. And it may or may not fall to you to police that, both from a legal perspective, but also just from a community perspective. While Team Fortress, lots of success with hats, Fallout tried to monetize its UGC and got massive blowback from the community because people were taking mods that were built by other people for free and basically stripping all the content out of it, repackaging it, and charging money for it. This remains a place where I think there is an opportunity, but it is something that I think we're still a ways away from seeing it fully supported. So the reason why I did this as a single video is because, to me, this is all kind of different things on the same spectrum. This is all content that comes out for the game after the game has launched. And it might be a $45 expansion pack built by the dev team, led by the same leadership. And it might be a free mustache pack made by a member of the community who has figured out how the tools work. And I do believe there is an opportunity for these things to coexist to a certain degree. If we as a development community are willing to embrace it, there is an opportunity to be had by embracing the mod community as well. How are publishers thinking about this problem right now? Across most of the industry, repeatable MTX is king. Publishers love the idea of being able to put a game out there in the world and have it make money forever, potentially bringing that average revenue per user up into the hundreds or thousands or bajillions of dollars. I think if they could do anything they wanted, what they would ideally make would be one game that rules them all, that is able to monetize to an infinite value for the rest of time. Given that that isn't possible, the next best thing from their perspective is something like what we see with FIFA. a game that comes out on a very regular cadence, very quickly, at full price, and then monetizes very deeply within that. No DLC, no expansion packs. Because from their perspective, you can just spend a little bit more money and turn that expansion pack into a full title. That's what you see with the Ubisoft games for the most part, is they don't make expansion packs, they just make another game and sell it at full price, which obviously makes more money and potentially has an attach rate of greater than 100% if you kind of look at it through that attach rate lens. If you turn an expansion pack into a game, it has that potential. It can actually attach above 100%. On the UGC front, publishers love the concept of UGC. They love users making things for their products for free that generate revenue or generate attention. So on the UGC front, the perfect world, I think, from the publisher's perspective would be people are generating tons of TikToks and things that offer free marketing for their games, and potentially building things for the game itself that are being sold, and then the publisher scrapes some money off the top. Team Fortress hats, as well as a very robust system of meme generation coming out of the game. They're scared of the consequences and legal implications of the paid ecosystems and what that might mean for them from a legal perspective. Most of the publishers are pretty conservative from a legal perspective, but there's a lot of money there, so they're definitely looking at that and trying to figure out a way that they can get their beak wet as well. I think you're going to see continued exploration in the UGC space to try to figure out a way where they can make money. One major part of outside the game UGC is Twitch, streaming the game itself. Publishers have a really complicated relationship with game streaming. Publishers like EA, who make a lot of games that are competitive, for the most part have decided that they like it because it, like the other forms of UGC, serve as free marketing for their games. Other companies like Nintendo, who make games that are more about surprise and novelty, actually kind of hate that it exists at all and see it as an infringement upon their intellectual rights. But I think for the most part, even the publishers that don't like it are resigned to it continuing to exist. You may see publishers experimenting with ways to limit it or turn it to their own needs or wants a little bit more, but I think the publishers have given up on this fight and are accepting that streaming is a thing that is now part of the industry and will continue to exist. On the flip side, what do I want? So I'm king of video games all of a sudden. How do I want to see all of these topics going forward? For games that I'm familiar with, the story-driven RPG games, this is what I would love to see. I would love to see us move actually away from story DLC, but not by getting rid of it, by rather doing what I talked about in the Dragon Age Inquisition video and actually packaging it up into expansion packs that are bigger and supported to a greater degree. You take Jaws of Haklon, The Descent, and Trespasser, put them together into a single $45 expansion pack. The economics for that make a lot of sense, and I think you can make it work really effectively. But it requires a change in the way that publishers think about products. I would be okay with us continuing to have sort of smaller DLC in the gameplay and other sort of content perspective. On the UGC front, I'm all for in-game UGC. Let's have tool sets for more games. Let's support the modding community. Let's support them making assets. Does that cut the bottom out of your MTX market? It absolutely does. So let's just abandon that field to the community and say, we're not gonna make hats and other 99-cent stuff. We're gonna let the community do that. Do we support monetization? Honestly, no, we don't. We don't open up that can of worms. We let the community exist in this free ecosystem. So you can see what I want and what publishers want, almost exactly the opposite. I want fewer, bigger, better bits of content with the community being supported down at the bottom. Whereas publishers want tons of repeatable spending so they can make even more money. Special thanks to my members. They are members of my community that provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. Also, we have merchandise. I'm currently wearing the 2DA Forever shirt, which is a very old school reference for people who have been following BioWare since the 1990s. But there are more topical shirts down there as well. Check them out. That's also a way to support the channel. What do you think about DLC and UGC and all of these things that we're discussing? Do you buy DLC when it comes out for a game that you're interested in? Only some? All of it? How about mods? Do you download mods and install them and do all the interesting things that potentially some of those provide for your game? Let me know that down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.